Just a reminder, you can catch me recording this podcast live on AMP. AMP is a new live radio app that lets you call in and chat with me in person while recording. Get the app on Apple's App Store and make sure you follow me at John Middlekauff to get notified when I go live. Let's dive into one of my favorite topics in the entire National Football League. And that's the Los Angeles Chargers, Brandon Staley, and the overall coaching situation of the team. I no longer, and if you are new to this show, I red flagged this guy well before it became popular. I red flagged this guy well before 2022 and that playoff game ever happened. For those longtime listeners, you guys have known where I've stood on this individual when he first started becoming the head coach. And honestly, even before that, I'd been hearing this guy's name. Not a Brandon Staley fan, definitely as a head coach. Defensive coordinator, we've only seen him 1 year, got a stacked team, but this is about Sunday against the Miami Dolphins. And listen, Tyreek Hill isn't just currently, a top 5, 10 non-quarterback in the NFL, offensively or defensively. He's truly one of the greatest players in the history of the sport. I've been watching football that I can remember now since the early 90s. I was thinking this yesterday when he was just going nuts. You could argue that the greatest wide receiver, Jerry Rice, the second greatest wide receiver is Randy Moss, and you could argue this guy's the third greatest wide receiver. Now, Terrell Owens, there are other names that are going to get thrown out there, but I think when the dust settles, this guy, clearly he's a top 5 lock. I think he might be considered in that class. By Jerry, Jerry's got 4 rings. Obviously, Randy Moss, I don't think he ever got one, but this guy, you could argue he's every bit as dominant as Randy Moss, to be honest with you. So listen, anytime you play a great player, he's going to beat you, right? I don't care what sport it is. In basketball, they always says great offense always beats great defense. You could put the greatest defender on Michael Jordan or Steph Curry. They're going to get theirs. But there comes a point, and I talked about this with Colin, where you draw the fucking line in the sand. You say, no mas. This is not going to keep happening. And I'm no longer going to be critical of Brandon Staley. This is not about him. This is about the franchise and the ownership. And really that starts with the Spanos family. Dean, who inherited it from his dad. And I truly believe this. I'm not just saying this to try to sound funny. I think being cheap when you have a lot of money is a legit disease. It's something you can't shake. If you're listening to this and you don't have a lot of money and you're cheap and you're frugal, totally understand. I haven't received a W-2 in 8+ years. Things are going pretty well right now. Those first couple years were an MFer. I mean, they were fucking hard. And I completely understand of being tight with money and being consumed with thinking about it and being worried about it, because you can't sometimes even think big picture when you're living week to week, rent to rent. You just don't have any money. It's tough. But when you get a lot of money, and I've always said this, listen, I love Tiger Woods. He's probably, him and Jordan are my 2 favorite athletes of all time. Tiger is notoriously cheap, right? I understand when Tiger's young, not figuring it out. Like at 45 years old, there's no excuse. The story coming out that he takes the Navy SEALs and the Marines out for burgers and doesn't pick up the tab. I'm sorry. That's on you, buddy. That's a problem. And Dean Spanos, and listen, I remember Greg Papa, who now is the voice of the 49ers, longtime voice of the Raiders, had a misunderstanding with Mark Davis, ironically over Kyle Shanahan's father, who he didn't want him to interview because he was Al Davis's mortal enemy, and Mark Davis ultimately fired him. But he told me a story one time about Jamarcus Russell. And if you remember, this is a long time ago now, but Jamarcus was in that era where first-round picks, especially high picks, he was the number 1 overall pick, got a lot of money. And at the time, I don't know what his signing bonus was, 20, 25, $30 million. And this is, mid-2000s, right? Well, Al, just like a lot of the NFL owners now, the amount of money they're making from TV is not nearly the same as it once was. Well, at the time, you had to cut the bonus check immediately. He did not have the money. And this is 15, 18 years ago. Times have dramatically changed. Even if you are on the lower end of wealth, right? You're not a Walton or a Harris or even what Jerry Jones and Robert Kraft are now. You still have a ton of money because every single year you're getting 350, 375 just from the TV deals, let alone from all the other money. Even if you're a shitty run franchise, what you're making in your stadium, right? So there is no excuse for being cheap. And to me, Dean Spanos was handed a mulligan this offseason. Sean Payton was not only working for Fox, he was spending a ton of time in Los Angeles. Colin talked about this all the time. He clearly loved it, loved being by the beach, felt revitalized, and openly talked about how awesome Justin Herbert was. Now, listen, we can argue all day long till the cows come home how good Sean Payton is, right? Well, is he a top 5 coach? He's clearly in a different fucking universe than Brandon Staley. Like, they have nothing in common when it comes to being a head coach in the NFL. The thing with Sean Payton was, and you saw with the Waltons, you had to pay him. He wasn't going to take your job just because he liked your players for $9 million, right? And the Spanoses, just look at their last several coaches, have all been cheap hires. And listen, I'm in the middle of a big remodel right now. I have spent an astronaut, all my money. I mean, I've spent a ton of money on this remodel. And now I got to buy furniture. And it's like, well, could I go cheap on the furniture? It's like, well, what's the point of putting hundreds and thousands of dollars into this home to then have it look crappy once it's furnished, right? So you almost got to double down. What is the point of giving Justin Herbert almost $200 million and have an average to below average coach and not even try to upgrade at that spot, right? The part of being a good, any business, I don't care what industry you're in, is to not be cheap at the most important things. It makes no sense. And in football, the 2 most important things you can have are your head coach, who in this case is also a play caller, and your quarterback. Well, teams clearly around the league have no problems paying the quarterback anymore, but there are teams that still get frugal and save a couple $1 million on the head coach. That's fucking embarrassing. Like, I just think you're a loser. Like, you don't understand anything. And clearly you would not own this team if it wasn't from your grandpa or your dad. And I'm not one of those, kind of radicals that like get consumed with people that inherit things. Because you look around, the NFL is a good example. Clark Hunt's running a high-level operation. He's willing to spend $15-20 million on a head coach. I mean, so just because you inherit something doesn't mean you're not capable. Like, it's an individual thing. I look at individuals in business no different than individual players. Every player, every human is their own story. And in this situation, they are historically cheap. Like, I don't even give you credit for paying Justin Herbert. Like, that must have been a tough call. I say this all the time. This television money now is monopoly money. Anyone in the last, listening to this, sold their home in the last, right now it's not great, but 6 months before right now and over the last couple of years and made several $100,000, $500,000, $1 million. That doesn't feel like the money you make when you work for something, right? Whatever you do for a job, when you get paid, you're like, hey, I put in time equity to earn this money. When you buy a home, you're like, sell a home, like that's an easy $500,000, $600,000. Even though in theory you live there, you paid the mortgage, it feels like free money. That's the same thing to me this television money is, because you don't have to win or lose to generate the money. What you actually make in your home games and your suite money, you have to earn that. But in terms of the money the league cuts you from NBC, CBS, and Fox, like, give me a break. It's not like the Chargers will win a lot of playoff games over that time. Hell, they were not even really making the playoffs over the last decade. So the Spanos family really, and as a lover of Justin Herbert, and honestly, I like their franchise just in terms of the players that have played for it. I root for West Coast teams. That's why it hurts me that the Pac-12 is disappearing, because I like the teams from the region where I'm from. And the Chargers are a team that I just watch a lot. Obviously, I just end up watching a lot of NFC and AFC West football, but I find them riveting with Justin Herbert. Yet I know what the outcome's going to be. Their head coach is going to fuck it up. And on Sunday, when you have this guy who is just going nuts, I'm not Bill Parcells here on a whiteboard scheming it up with Bill Belichick's next to me. I don't pretend to know more defensive football than Brandon Staley. But I also have been watching football long enough to know what you're doing is not working. Bill Belichick said this on the top 100 players, and it was so simplistic, but it was so correct. Like, sometimes we overcomplicate football. Like, take strengths, put them against their weaknesses, take weaknesses, and try to avoid them against their strengths. Like, that's kind of what football is. And this guy, who is one of the fastest players, if not the fastest player in league history, I'm not talking about actual 40 time. I'm talking about the way the dude plays. So just to have him out there on one-on-one coverage when your corner clearly doesn't really know what he's doing and is not playing well is malpractice. But again, to put this at Brandon Staley, like, this is on the ownership. They signed up for this. So if you're a Charger fan, if you're someone that gambled on them, this is on their ownership. This is. Because I'll give you the Dolphins, who are a chaotic franchise, clearly, always getting in trouble with the league, doing weird shit. Their owner, who has a ton of money, is always willing to try shit. Trying to hire Harbaugh, stealing Shanahan's best guy, trying to sign Brady. Like, he's just always taking swings. He's using his money, which last time I checked, he made, and he knows that doubling down on important things matter. And his coach, who I've been following because he was on Kyle Shanahan's staff for a long time now, quirky dude, but he knows what he's doing. And clearly, as a play caller offensively, knows how to get his best players in position to succeed. And I don't think the same can be said about Brandon Staley. But we didn't learn that on Sunday. We knew that last year, that he's overwhelmed with his decisions, his defensive play calling in big moments, always lets you down, especially against good teams. What are the Dolphins? Very talented team. What was the playoff game against the Jags? Very talented team. No one cares when you beat average to below average teams. You have to beat these good teams because you're trying to make a little jet run. So I just think that one's on Dean Spanos, man. Just a complete embarrassment. Let's get to the Patriot game, and on the Patriots specifically. And I was thinking this, and I talked to Colin a little bit about it, but watching Anthony Richardson, it's why I'm a believer in taking big swings. Because when you take a big swing, there's no guarantee you're going to hit any quarterback when you draft, right? There are, I guess, a few sure things over the history of the league. Elway, Peyton Manning, Luck, Trevor Lawrence. So you just know are going to be good. You don't know if they're going to be like all-time great good, but they're going to be good. And when you look at Mac Jones and Kenny Pickett, for those guys to be good, they have to exceed and be perfect in terms of their game, right? For Anthony Richardson to be good, he just needs to be pretty accurate and run around and just make some shit happen. Now, it doesn't mean he's ever going to be a Pro Bowl or whatever, but his ability just to hit a floor, right, is easier to get to if he is just solid. Where if Mac Jones is just solid, he's not going to be any good. If Kenny Pickett is just solid, good luck, right? And you saw Mac Jones, who actually, after the first quarter, kind of got it together and made a lot of really good throws. But early on, and this has plagued him his entire career, part of the reason Kyle Shanahan loved Mac Jones, which I thought was insane, drafted him at number 3 overall, and he clearly regrets it because if he could do it over, even though Brock Purdy's better than Mac Jones, but you know what I mean. Kyle Shanahan could do it over. He just would have taken Mac Jones there, not Trey Lance. But the problem with Mac Jones of drafting him, you're like, well, he's just going to be very accurate, not turn the ball over. Yet in the pros, he turns the ball over a lot. He makes decisions. It's like, what are you doing? Why are you making that throw? Because you're not good enough to bounce it out on the other end. And yesterday, the difference in that game was the pick six. And this is the other thing that I always wondered. When you draft a guy in the Northeast kind of area, right? I would say Pittsburgh to Baltimore, Philly, Washington, up through New York and Boston. The weather is just crazy over there, right? It rains in September. It gets freezing cold in November, December, and January. You have to be able to play in inclement weather. Think about some of the best quarterbacks over the years, just the last couple of decades. Obviously, Tom, incredible cold weather quarterback. Eli Manning could play in the cold weather. Forever in Philadelphia, Donovan McNabb, big arm, big, strong guy, cold weather guy. I'm not saying they're all perfect beside Tom, but you got to have some. Mac Jones started raining, Florida guy, went to Alabama, inclement weather. That's not really his thing. It's raining early in that game, and what happens? Ball kind of slips out of his hands. It goes high, pick six. I'm not trying to write up the Patriots because they did show some heart. They did show some mettle. Clearly, Bill O'Brien is a massive, massive upgrade. And again, Mac had a good stretch in that game. But, man, I just, when you're betting on a guy who has to be perfect for you to beat good teams, and think about this. We already know right away, those divisional games are going to be really, really hard. So they still got 6 of those remaining. I don't see it. I think it's going to be a huge challenge. Same goes with Kenny Pickett. Sometimes I overvalue Kenny in theory has more talent around him than Mac, but their margin for error is just so much smaller than the talented guys. Can I tell you about my friends at Factor? With the busy fall season just around the corner, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up with fast, chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Let's face it, a lot of us moving fast, going places, and don't have time to eat healthy. And that's a key. A lot of us are trying to improve our diets. That's where Factors come in. Choose from 34 weekly flavored packed dietitian-approved meals ready to eat in less than 2 minutes. Level up with the Gourmet Plus options prepared to perfection by chefs ready to eat in record time. If you're looking for calorie-conscious options ahead of the busy season, try delicious, dietitian-approved calorie-smart meals with around or less than 550 calories per serving. How do you beat that? So head to factormeals.com/John50 and use the code JOHN50 to get 50% off. That's code John50 at factormeals.com/John50 to get 50% off. A couple other guys who were in new spots, Jimmy G and Derek Carr. I'm a big believer in any famous job, but especially with quarterback, any pro sport, right? You need positive momentum early. I don't know if you're big baseball people, but if you've watched the story with Trey Turner, they gave him $300 million, goes to the Phillies, is just horrendous. I mean, he's having a historically bad year. Someone online says we should start cheering him. So every time he came up, they gave him like a standing ovation. He broke out of the slump. He started dominating. But early on, it was pretty ugly, right? No positive momentum. Because anytime you go to a new place, hell, most of us, if you get a new job, it's that first couple weeks, couple months, 6 months. There's a feeling out process, getting to know people, trying to get on everyone's good side, even if you're a boss. Like there's a feeling out process. And if things start negatively, sometimes it's hard to dig yourself out of that hole. And I think with these two quarterbacks, Jimmy G and Derek Carr, little different situations, right? For the Saints, anything less than winning that division will be bad. Like, it'd be embarrassing. They should 100% win that division. Derek's been to the playoffs a couple times. He's had good seasons. There is no excuse, not only for him to be the best quarterback in the division, but for that team as a group to win 10, 11 games. Look at their schedule. And yesterday, I'm watching that thing against the Titans in the classic Vrabel, making it ugly. His quarterback's throwing interception after interception. Carr's kind of hit or miss. It's like, Derek, you got to find a way to win this game. Throws a big touchdown and then ices the game. And he had some plays that were pretty ugly. He's Derek Carr. He's going to have some bad plays. But he made a couple big plays that were ultimately the difference in the game. And I think having that momentum, getting on the right side and winning that game, for him, having a fan base that loves football, obviously football is a really big deal in the South. For himself, it's a polarizing individual. That was huge. And I'd say the same thing with Jimmy G, who is just king of red zone interceptions. No one who is a solid player will throw a red zone interception in a back-breaking time quite like Jimmy Garoppolo. He's one of the easily the best-looking quarterbacks we've ever seen. He's actually better, I think, than the average fan realizes, but he is a complicated enigma as a player because he's never going to be a Pro Bowler, let alone some top 10 guy. But clearly, if your operation just knows what they're doing, you have a good head coach, you have good players around him, you can win games. Jimmy Garoppolo, when he started at quarterback, now he's had a lot of advantages. He's played on really good teams in San Francisco. And this Raider team actually has a decent amount of talent. You can win with them. Now, the ceiling for the 49ers was much higher than this Raider team, but this Raider team is good enough to be 10-plus wins and compete for a wild card spot. I feel pretty confident about that. And Jimmy Garoppolo yesterday, after that pick, I'm like, oh my God, Jimmy, this is how your Raider career is going to start, just like this. And he just found a way. He made a big run at the end of the game. He's diving for first downs, made some big throws. His toughness can never be questioned. Really, really big moment for two guys in a weird way are kind of synonymous with each other. Obviously, Jimmy's had more playoff success, just given that he's played in more playoff games. But they were in the same draft, both second-round players, and both got really big wins yesterday. Okay, the Packers and the Bears. If you listen to the Thursday pod, I guess it came out Friday with Stuckey, our take was pretty simple on that game. Was if you just remove the quarterbacks, right? We had no clue what Jordan Love was going to look like. We've never seen him really. I don't count that Chiefs game a couple years ago when his girlfriend and mom sat at the top of Arrowhead. And Justin Fields, which the team had been telling me he'd gotten way better. Time was going to tell. If we just remove both of them and we just went roster for roster, man for man, it was not even a comparison. The Packers team, player for player, was in a different universe than the Bears, and rightfully so. The Packers, with Rodgers, have been one of the better teams in the league. Fantastic offensive line. They got young skill guys, even though one of them was injured yesterday. Good running backs, a ton of highly drafted defensive players. Packer fans, you know this. Like, your team is talented. Honestly, defensively, I think a lot of people thought they've underachieved for years with the high-end talent they've had. So going into that game, regardless of the quarterback play, you had to bet the Packers just on the simple fact their team was way better and their coach is much more accomplished. Yet in that game, I'll say this, I'll start with Jordan Love. I'm not going to have some big opinion on him at that game. I think the Bears, and I've said this before, and I feel even stronger about it today, fucking stink. They are a bad football team. They are going to compete for the number one drafting team. So Jordan Love, good game, missed a couple throws, but also hit a nice touchdown, had a sweet throwback play, good scheme by LaFleur. Packers just look buttoned up, like a high-level operation. But I'm going to judge him when he plays the better teams. Solid start. I'm not diminishing what happened yesterday, but how do you look against the Lions? How do you just look against better competition? Time will tell. I would say if you're a Packer fan, you should be excited. That was an exciting win of you still own the Bears, regardless who plays quarterback for you. And I think that if he is just somewhere in the middle of the pack, obviously he's not going to be a top 10 quarterback, but if he can just enter the chat of the Jimmy Garoppolos and the Derek Carrs, kind of that world, right? 13 through 16, you got a chance to make the playoffs, and honestly, you easily could. But when it comes to the Bears, I've said it their roster's not good. But a lot of people, I think the reaction is, the offensive coordinator for the Bears, what is he doing? Well, last year, all we talked about was part of the reason they didn't really have success because they weren't winning any games, but Justin Fields was just making sweet plays. It's because they operated in a run-heavy offense, right? He was running the ball all the time, and he's one of the better athletes we've ever seen. I mean, he's talk about an elite athlete. Justin Fields is an elite athlete. But ultimately, if I'm going to judge you, can you throw the ball? So I'm going to scheme plays where it's like I put it on his shoulder. Now, the Packers D-line was destroying the Bears up front. They all looked like, it's like, does Nick Bosa, TJ Watt, and Aaron Donald play for the Packers? Because that's what it looked like. They were every other play. But when he had some time, the knock on him is rhythm, timing, and seeing it. No one disputes his arm strength and his just ability to kind of freelance when nothing's there. But to be a good NFL quarterback, you have to just nitpick you from the pocket, right? Can you just make the throws from the pocket? And right now, when you watch Justin Fields, you're like, he looks exactly like the guy last year. The only difference was yesterday they kind of scrapped, run around all the time, and just said, hey, beat him with your arm. And I think the Bears need to find out this year, it's okay losing games if you find out he can't beat him with the arm or beat other teams with his arm, right? And if he can't, so be it. I've been saying this for a while. You know the good thing about the Bears? They got two things going for them. If they suck, they'll get a high pick, incredible quarterback draft. And listen, I don't blame anyone if you live outside of Atlanta or Carolina for not watching the Panthers-Falcons game. The Panthers stink. They honestly might be worse than the Bears because at least when the dust settles, Fields can just sprint around and maybe run for a couple touchdowns. That is not Bryce Young's. The Panthers might win 3 games. Bears might win 4 or 5, but we're talking about 2 picks that could be in the top 5. And those 2 picks can change your franchise. And maybe at the end of the season, you realize Fields not that guy. And you know the good thing is Ryan Poles didn't trade for him. Now, the one thing Ryan Poles, he just said a lot of comments over the years is like, let's just take a deep breath. No more talking and let's just figure this out. Like, time's on our side. The Bears are, kind of cheap, so they're not going to fire anybody. They're not going to make any knee-jerk reactions. They'll give me some time. I'll get a quarterback of my own. This is not my quarterback. But no more ever saying, like, we're going to run the North again, or I spent 80 hours. I moved a cot into my office to watch film for the draft. Like, you stink. And listen, I no one's disputing your work ethic or how much you like football and all that stuff. but your team's not very good, and it's not going to be good for a while. And I think one question is going to be, when you do end up drafting Caleb Williams, Drake May, one of these sweet Shador Sanders, who knows, one of these sweet quarterbacks, is Eberflus the guy to have around the quarterback? Like, it's just, it is nice having offensive coaches with young quarterbacks. It just does make it a little easier. This isn't 1987 where you can have a defensive coach and defense can dominate, and you can have Mike Singletary and John Lynch and Warren Sapp and these guys making unlimited tackles and win a bunch of ugly games. That's not really the way the sport works. It's dramatically different. Obviously, you need a good defense. The Cowboys, the 49ers. I'm not saying you don't. Hell, the Patriots, like, I want a good defense. But the game has dramatically changed. And I do wonder if this season gets ugly again. Like, is Eberflus on scholarship? I think Ryan Poles is going to get another coach. But I buckle up. This thing is going to get ugly before it gets pretty. Quickly, I just want to hit on this really briefly. Brenda Tracy, the lady who speaks to a lot of college teams. I noticed her years ago. David Shaw always had her speak to the Stanford football program back when they were constantly a top 10 program, even when they sucked. I think he brought her every year. She went through all these college programs, a lot of Power Five, talked about, a gang rape situation she was involved in, and just became a fixture for a lot of college coaches to use her to give messages to their team about, I've never been in one of her talks, but pretty clear about the way to treat women, the way to act. And listen, when I was at Fresno State, we would have the police chief come over. Like, it's a point of emphasis. I don't care where you are. But for Mel Tucker to even attempt to listen, I say this all the time about these situations. Two people know the true details about this, but he admitted to masturbating on a phone call with her. To me, that's a fireable offense in itself, because part of being a head coach, part of entrusting someone, especially at this level, when you start paying a guy $8 to $10 million, same thing for a CEO, is decision making. I mean, these coaches talk about it 24/7, 365 to their players. Can I trust you? Coaches say this all the time. Can I trust you? Mel Tucker can't be trusted to not just be a moron. Clearly, they're suspending him right now without pay to ultimately fire him because they owe him $70+ million, which I think they wanted out of before this ever came out. But this is one of those where Mel Tucker, egg on his face, that's underselling it. Like, I just view this guy as a complete and utter idiot. Like, have some self-discipline, my man. I know he was married, claimed he was single. None of that matters to me. Just, this is the individual. This is the woman that you attempted to have a sexual relationship with. Like, can you just use a couple brain cells and make a decision that, I don't know, might be the right one? Like, I mean, what are we doing? And it just shows you that you give certain people power and money. Like, most people are not Nick Saban. Most people are not David Shaw, right? Most people are not Andy Reid that they can handle it. Most people can't. And Mel Tucker was always viewed by people around football as a really high-level guy, as a good football coach. It just turned out he didn't have the capacity to handle that spot, because this isn't an error in judgment. This is just, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, this is complete and utter moron. And under no circumstances would any athletic director, would any team president, immediately when they got wind, honestly, even if he was attempting to date her, I'd be like, what are we doing, man? Let's you're attempting to be in a relationship with a woman that speaks to your team about a gang rape. Like, that is the person. And obviously she told immediately Michigan State, also an institution that has dealt with, I don't know, some serious issues. Larry Nassar, ever heard of him? So I can't even get over the stupidity of Mel Tucker, a guy that from the outside, I actually stopped respecting him as much as a head coach because I don't know if he's that good. I think he kind of robbed Michigan State over that $90+ million contract just because of Kenneth Walker, who they got in the transfer portal. Since then, it's been pretty ugly. But this is, you're never working again, buddy. I don't mean as assistant coach. I don't know. But as a head coach, who is ever hiring this person? This is all you're masturbating on the phone with her when clearly, based on her story, she's uncomfortable with it. What are you doing, man? Wow. A couple things really quick. YouTube TV. My reaction, I got the ticket. I give it an A minus. I really do. I thought it was easy to operate. I thought the ability to the 4 boxes is fantastic. I had DirecTV, the app, on my TV, and it was impossible to ever get the 4 games like that because, I didn't have Roku or whatever. This is really easy. The only reason I don't give it an A is, and listen, I entrust that any of, I guess, how would you say it? These tech companies, these people that are in this business adapt fast, right? That's the problem with the cable model, right? They can't adapt, that they're stuck. I would expect YouTube TV within this year, if definitely by next year, to have the capability of placing the games I want to on my television screen. So I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was easy to use. I didn't, I guess, pay for the red zone. I tweeted it out. Someone's like, you just got to pay for it separately. I did. And then boom, it's up there immediately. So I thought very seamless. If you live in an area that doesn't have your team's game, I highly recommend YouTube TV, the Sunday package. Tom Brady, I don't think many people of his stature, a 45-year-old who's worth as much as him, who's an accomplished as much as he has, would ever in a million years put on a jersey, even though it's his own jersey, like a little kid at halftime in that situation. And you can call it cheesy. You can say whatever you want. I thought that was kind of as cool, raw, and authentic. And Tom running down like he used to as a player and doing the let's go to the crowd. I just thought that was cool. And I thought Tom, kind of gets it. And I think most guys, I don't ever remember seeing a guy put on a jersey in that scenario, especially one of his stature. So it was a cool moment. And where I've stood on them bringing it back, Tom. He's sitting there with the Kraft family, multiple shots early in the game when it was 16-0, like before you could snap your fingers. You start wondering, what are they talking about? I mean, what are they discussing up there? And clearly they are I think Robert Kraft would love to have Tom Brady run his franchise. Now, is Tom willing to give his time to do that? You never know. I mean, once you see the jersey and you see him fist pump, you don't take the football addiction out of someone. You just don't. And you'll never quite get the highs doing TVs. Like, I think Peyton Manning and Eli have fun doing Monday Night Football, but it's not the same as being in the trenches. Ask John Lynch the difference between running and picking the players than it is sitting in the booth with makeup and a tie. There's just a difference in terms of having skin in the game. And Tom Brady, to me, is a skin in the game guy. So it's just something to keep an eye on. I know he owns a little piece of the Raiders. Obviously, there are complications behind it, but I'd keep an eye on that one. Alabama has issues. I think the day and age of just locking them up as a national championship, like in the game, I think are over. Doesn't mean they're going to suck. Doesn't mean that they're not going to win 9 games with their eyes closed. But like, we've all been watching college football long enough that they don't pass the eye test. They didn't last year, and they definitely don't right now. Now, last year, they still had Bryce Young. This year, that quarterback, I don't know. I don't see it. Obviously, a big-time athlete, can throw the ball far, but you can't compete for the playoffs in 2023 with that guy at quarterback. Now with all the other quarterbacks around the country. And you just have to wonder if the transfer portal, if NIL has not only neutralized college football, but has hurt them. It hurt them specifically, where they used to be able to corner the market. You can probably say the same thing for Ohio State. But I would imagine Alabama has a little bit harder time than Ohio State cutting some of these checks for these players. And I think it immediately reflects when you watch this. Now, Nick Saban's over 70 years old. Is he just going to coach forever, not being in the playoffs? I guess next year, once they go to 12-team playoff, you might as well take your swing at that because he can get to 9-10 wins and get into that. But I'm not trying to overreact and act like they're just some scrub program. I just think the day and age of them winning national championships is over. And I guess the Browns lost their starting tackle, which is not ideal. Now, I thought Kevin Stefanski had a great line. There are no red shirts in the NFL. So they have a young player who clearly they drafted who's just going to get thrust into the action that they're high on. But anytime you lose a guy that you gave a 4-year, $80 million contract to, paying a ton of cash, who's a really good player in Jack Conklin, that hurts. And it's the thing that I say it all the time. There's nothing worse in the NFL. As a fan, obviously, if you're a teammate, as a coach, as an executive, of seeing one of your impact players lying there on the ground. It's the absolute worst. And that view of a guy in the back of a cart, getting fist pounds and hugs from his teammates because they know. Like you don't know the exact injury at the time. Like, did he break his leg? Did he tear his ACL? But they know it's bad. And that's my least favorite part of football on Sundays, because we just see the cart come out a lot, and it just has, grave consequences when it's, a certain player on your team that you just can't replace. Sometimes you hope you can, but there's a big difference of being high on a guy because of the offseason, the preseason, and then going against TJ Watt. It's like, buckle up, good luck.